Jesus said, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." The Gospel of our Lord. So, you know I talk a lot about not being a musician and all that. I have a degree in music and all that fancy stuff. But I was in college so long that I was able to acquire a second major, political science. Goes together with music perfectly. Because, you know, as politicians do song and dance. No, because I don't talk about that degree much because, well, as you can see, I will have cashed that one in too. But I like poli-sci. I was really good at it. I really enjoyed certain aspects of it. I enjoyed practical politics. What we mean by practical politics is like government, and how legislatures work, and how we vote, and how the apparatus of government and the theory of government is very fascinating. And I really enjoyed studying law. Constitutional law, criminal law, civil justice. I took them all. I loved it all. My advisor, when I went back to college in the end there to graduate, he said, "Go to law school, skip seminary, go become a lawyer." I actually beat out all the law candidates on our aptitude test. The Lord had other plans. The part of poli-sci I didn't enjoy so much, though, was economics. It didn't grab me. It was not my strong suit. I did not enjoy studying economics. It was just a frustrating subject to me. However, it's going to come in handy this morning because Jesus is talking about economics. Did you like that line? You sell your possessions and give alms. Go and do what Jesus said. Any takers? He does mean sell everything, by the way. Any takers? Anyone? Leave church, go sell everything you own, give it away to the poor, and become poor yourself? And then trust somebody else will do the same for you? No? No takers? It's an odd statement, isn't it? Jesus has been talking about how we worry about things like possessions, and how we worry about how we're going to survive, and how we worry about where our daily bread is going to come from, and where our clothing is going to come from. You remember last week we had that parable about the man who had a bumper crop, and he built bigger barns to store up all his stuff so he'd never run out. Because that was a worry. What if I run out? And in between that lesson and this lesson, Jesus talked about, well, think about birds. I mean, they don't do any work at all, but God feeds them. And think about the flowers of the field. They don't do anything, but God clothes them more beautifully than Solomon ever looked like in his most splendiferous. So why are you worried? Why should you worry about food and clothing? If God takes care of birds and flowers, which are here today and gone tomorrow, how much more will God take care of you, you of little faith? And so the opening line today, do not be afraid, little flock. If you think God is generous with food and clothing, well, God wants to give you God's kingdom. God wants to give you the greatest gift of all. God wants to give you grace and love and salvation and eternal life. What do you have to be afraid of? Why are you worried? So sell everything you have and give it away. Why worry? Well, here's why you worry. Because then you won't have anything. Now, here's the economics part. This is where all those years of training come in. In Jesus' day, they understood that wealth was a limited thing. Wealth was a finite quantity. There was exactly X amount of wealth in the world that it could not be added to. There was a limit to what there was. Now, it was a hugely big limit, but there was a limit. You could not produce new wealth. There was what there was, and that was it. There was one pie, it was X big, and everybody got to divide it up. So they looked at the world and they realized, well, if you're the emperor, you've got about 85% of that pie. And so all the rest of us have to fight over that 15%. Because that's all there is. So for one person to get more, another person has to get less. So if Greg wants to get more money, then Bob has to have less. The only way you can give alms is to give up something of yours. That's how the system works in their mind. You can't make new wealth. There is no such thing as excess. There is what you have. And so you treasure it and you hoard it because there's no more to be gotten. You just shuffle it around between people. That was their economic reality. Over time, economics has changed. And how we understand wealth has changed. So that now, in this day and age, we understand that wealth is actually infinite. There actually is no limit to the amount we can produce and consume and own, and we can just create more. Because what is wealth anymore today? It's nothing. It's paper. It's a number on a sheet of paper. If you went to your bank, they don't have all your money sitting there. They have a statement that says if you need it, we'll get it for you. They don't have it. That $10 bill in your wallet isn't worth $10. It's a piece of paper that says you have $10. And if you want to make more, go ahead, make more. We can keep printing money until we run out of paper. We can mint coins for the rest of the time. Because wealth has become an ephemeral thing. Wealth has become a transitory thing. It has become something we define and create outside of any intrinsic real substance. In the ancient world, gold was it. Substance was it. Wealth was a physical thing. That's why there was a limited amount to it. We've changed the rules of wealth. Which means we have to look at what Jesus says and think of it not in terms of Jesus' reality, but in terms of our reality. Greg can make all the money he wants and it has no impact on Bob at all. Bob does not have to go into poverty for Greg to become wealthy. Conversely, Greg can take what he has and help the poor to no detriment to himself. Unless he chooses to. I mean, he could choose to wipe himself out, but that's his choice now. We have a different way of understanding our obligations to the world than Jesus had. Because our understanding of what constitutes wealth and prosperity and generosity have evolved and changed over the centuries. So our problem is not so much, oh my goodness, we're going to run out of stuff. Our problem is much more, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with all this stuff? We've flipped it over from a fear of running out to a concern over we have too much. How many of us live in an empty house? Paper that while you ponder that. How many of us here live in an empty house? Anybody? No, we don't, do we? See, people in Jesus' day did it. They could live in an empty house. They slept on the floor. How many of you sleep on the floor? Because you have no choice. When you go home from church today, you'll be able to have lunch, won't you? Anybody here going to go home to no food at all in the house? No. We don't live in that reality. Our reality is, and if we don't have it, what can we do? We can go get some. So while the imagery that Jesus uses might be dated, the challenge is still the same. It's just our worry is taking a different direction. We're still worried. We're still afraid. But now it's, are we keeping up? Now is it, do we have enough? So for the last 2 weeks, I've been asking you that question from Dude Tomato, right? Do you have everything you want? The answer probably is really yes, we do. Do you have everything you need? Absolutely we do. We have more than we'll ever need. So when Jesus talks to us about economics, he's talking to us as people who have more than we could ever imagine. Your great-grandparents could not imagine what you live like. Your grandparents could. My grandmother came over from Sweden on a boat. And the sum total of all of their possessions fit in 2 trunks, like that. I know that because one of them is sitting in my living room. Everything the family of 10 owned fit in 2 trunks. It fit in their cabin on an ocean liner. My grandmother walked into my house today, she'd probably pass out. Because everything I own won't fit in a 24-foot semi. And I don't own that much in the grand scheme of things. We talked one time about how our trucks have gotten bigger every time we move. When we moved to New York 23 years ago, 22 years ago, we had a back of a station wagon and the smallest U-Haul truck we could rent. When we moved to our current house, we had a semi. Crazy, isn't it? Jesus always calls us to think about our wealth. Think about our possessions. Think about how we think about them. Think about the place that they have in our lives. No different in this reading today. It's still a challenge to think about what you have and what you're going to do with it. One reality has not changed from Jesus' day to ours. You still can't take it with you. It's here. You can store up treasure on earth more than anybody in our past could ever have imagined. But what do you do with it? How do you store up treasure in heaven when you have overwhelming treasure on earth? Where is your heart? Because it's where your treasure is. Not the other way around. Churches have fallen down for centuries by telling us that where our heart is, there our treasure is. That's not true. Jesus is right. Wherever you put your treasure, that's where your heart is. You cannot serve both God and wealth. Most of us answer, okay, I like wealth. What do we do? How do we answer that question of Jesus? Where is your treasure? What will you do with what you have been blessed with? Because here's the other thing that Jesus says to challenge the economic assumptions of his day. They lived in a world of scarcity. In their mind, everything was scarce. Jesus came along and said, no, you're wrong. God has granted us abundance beyond measure. God has granted us an abundance of everything we could ever possibly need. God has blessed this world with an abundance. God can care and feed every single creature that walks on this earth. What are you worried about? There's more than enough. There's more than enough because God is a God of abundance. God does not give stingily. God gives generously. More than generously. To use that famous Philly sports buzz phrase, God spends stupid money on us every single minute. And we get more bang for our buck. Because God spends stupid on us. Grace without limit. Forgiveness without end. Love without measure. life without end in God's kingdom, the things that truly matter, God rains down on us like a never-ending storm. What is it? Crowder said, if grace is an ocean, we're all sinking in it. It's so deep and big. There's more than enough. There's more than enough for everybody today. The question is, what do we do? God invites us to do one simple thing. Share. Share because you have enough to share with. Share because there's enough for everybody. Share because God blesses with an abundance we can't even comprehend. I read this statistic a couple years ago. There's enough food produced on earth for every human being to be fat. Think about that. There's enough food produced on earth for every person to eat 4 pounds of food every day. You eat 4 pounds of food today? I ain't gonna. There's enough food produced for everybody on earth to be fat, and there are people starving. And not just people on some third world country on some other continent. There's people starving right here. We're doing that collection for Preston's Pantry because there are people who have no option but to go to a pantry to get something to eat. We throw away a third of the food we purchase. Do you know that? A third of what we buy, we throw away. I go to my McDonald's in Percy. That's usually because I'm desperate, I admit it. And I see people rummaging in the garbage cans in Percy, one of the wealthiest communities in Bucks County. One of the wealthiest towns per capita in the state of Pennsylvania. And there are people rummaging in the garbage cans of McDonald's to pull out a half-eaten piece of whatever it is, or Big Macs. Because that's what they're going to eat. Because we threw it out. Jesus invites his disciples to be ready for action. Because you never know when Jesus will come. And you know, when I first read that, I'm thinking what I always was trained to think, that's the end of the world. That's the second coming of Jesus. My wife said to me, no, it isn't. That's today. Jesus is coming today. Not in some apocalyptic descent from the sky, but in the eyes of a hungry child. In the eyes of a homeless family. In the eyes of a person whose life has been destroyed by addiction or abuse or neglect. Jesus is coming to us in the eyes of all the people who cry out to us, where's mine? Gird your loins for action. Fasten your belt around your waist. Because Jesus has already come. He comes every day in the eyes of those who have nothing. He looks at us. He says, what will you do about it? There's more than enough. It costs you nothing. What will you do? You don't have to sell your possessions anymore. But we still have to do alms. And we still have to change the reality of those who have nothing. Because the table is abundantly full. Our job is simply to invite people to share it with